Some people are left to die quietly, so nobody has to watch. That's the part nobody tells you about the mountains in winter. It isn't the cold that kills first. It's the leaving, the turned back, the sound of boots getting smaller in the snow while you're still breathing, still reaching, still saying a name that stopped mattering to the person walking away. I found her on the third day of a storm that had no business letting anything live through it. I wasn't looking for a person. I was looking for a lost mule and a reason to be angry at the weather. What I found instead was a woman half buried in a drift, blue at the lips, one hand frozen open like she'd been trying to hold something that was already gone. She expected to die out there. She'd made her peace with it. I could see that in her eyes when they finally opened, the way a person looks at you when they've already said goodbye to the world and you've shown up late to argue. This is the story of what happened after, of a woman who was thrown away like she was nothing, and a man who'd spent 20 years believing the same thing about himself. Neither of us had any hope left to spare. Somehow we found some anyway. Stay with me. This one takes its time because she did too. The mule was gone, and I was cursing it by name when I first saw the color that didn't belong. Everything up on that ridge was one of three things: white, gray, or the dead black of pine when the wind stripped the snow off it. So when I caught a smudge of faded blue against a drift, my first thought was that I'd finally worn my eyes out. A man spends enough winters alone at 9,000 feet, he starts seeing things. Faces in the rock, his mother in the smoke. I'd learned to let those go without arguing. But blue doesn't move on its own, and this blue moved. Just barely. A hand, I realized. Fingers curling and uncurling, slow as a spider dying on a windowsill. I want to tell you I ran. The truth is I stood there a full 3 seconds doing the math a man does when he's been burned by the world enough times. What does this cost me? What does it want? What happens if I turn around and pretend I saw nothing? I've kept a tally in my head my whole life, ever since I was a boy. My father used to say a man who doesn't count his losses gets robbed twice. So I count. Everything. Days, dollars, the number of times I've been left. That last number's high enough that I stopped saying it out loud. The tally said, keep walking. The storm was closing. My hands were already going stupid with cold. Whatever was out there was most likely already gone, and dragging a corpse down a mountain in a whiteout is how you make two corpses. Then the hand reached toward me, not grabbing, just reaching, the way a child reaches in its sleep for something it can't name. I dropped the mule's lead rope and went. She was buried to the chest, packed in like the mountain had started to swallow her and gotten bored halfway through. Her lips were the wrong color. Her lashes had frozen into little white hooks. She had on a traveling coat that might have been decent in a town parlor and was worth exactly nothing up here, and one boot, and her other foot was bare and gray, and I did not let myself look at it too long. Hey, my voice came out cracked from 3 days of talking to nobody. Hey, you in there? Her eyes opened. I've thought about that moment more than I've thought about almost anything in my life, and I still can't get the words right. Her eyes opened and they weren't afraid. That's the thing that near about knocked me over. A dying woman is supposed to be afraid. She looked at me the way you'd look at weather, like I was one more thing happening to her that she had no say in. You came back, she said. Not a question, barely a whisper. There was blood dried at the corner of her mouth where she'd bitten her lip through sometime, keeping quiet. I ain't been here before, I said. Something crossed her face then. A flicker, confusion, and under it something worse, hope, the ugly, involuntary kind that a person hates themselves for feeling. She'd thought I was someone else. She'd thought the someone had come back for her. They hadn't. I'd learned that soon enough. Right then, all I knew was I had to get her out of that drift before the cold finished the sentence it had started. I dug with my hands because I'd left the shovel with the pack. The snow had set around her like wet plaster. I talked the whole time, dumb stuff, anything, because a man's voice is a rope you can throw to somebody who's drifting. Name's Elias, I told her. Elias Rourke. I got a cabin, ain't much. Roof leaks over the stove, but that's the only place you'd want to leak anyhow. I got an arm free. It flopped like it wasn't hers. You keep them eyes open now. You close 'em, I'll be talking to myself, and I do enough of that. She made a sound. It took me a second to understand it was a laugh. The smallest, most broken laugh you ever heard, and it cost her something to give it. Even then. Even buried alive with one boot gone. That laugh is the reason I didn't leave her at the tree line when my back gave out. I want that on the record. Getting her down took the rest of the daylight, and most of what I had. She couldn't walk. That bare foot wouldn't hold her, and her legs had gone somewhere she couldn't call them back from. So I carried her the way you carry something you're afraid of breaking badly and too tight. She wasn't heavy. That was its own kind of terrible. A grown woman shouldn't weigh what she weighed. Somewhere between wherever she'd come from and that drift, she'd been made small. Twice I went down. The second time I lay in the snow with her half on top of me, and I thought, clear as a bell, this is where we both stop. I was tired in the marrow. The kind of tired that whispers to you real gentle that the cold isn't so bad once you give in, that you could just rest here, just for a minute. Her hand found my collar. Frozen fingers, no strength in them at all. She didn't pull. She couldn't have moved a kitten. But she held on, and near my ear, so quiet I might have dreamed it, she said, "Not yet." 2 words. From a woman who'd been ready to die an hour before, telling me not yet. I got up. I don't know how. There's a strength that lives underneath the strength you know about, and you only ever find it when someone else has run out of theirs and handed you the job of carrying both. We reached the cabin after dark. I kicked the door in because my hands wouldn't work the latch, laid her by the stove, and built the fire up until the little iron thing roared like it was angry. Then I did the things you do, got the wet off her, wrapped her in every blanket and hide I owned, put my own body against her back because there was no faster heat than that, and I held her and I counted her breaths. 20 to the minute. Then 18. Then, terribly, 11. "Don't you dare," I said into her hair, which had thawed enough to smell like wood smoke and something floral gone stale, some perfume she'd worn for a life that had thrown her out. "Don't you dare do it here. Not after all that. I'll be furious." The breaths held at 11, then slow as spring climbed back to 14. I stayed awake all night. I've done a lot of hard things, a lot of hard nights. That was the longest one. Every time I felt her chest go still, I'd shake her, and she'd hate me for it, and I'd feel her hate as a little tremor, and it was the best feeling in the world because hate needs a person to do it. Somewhere near dawn she started to shiver, hard, violent, teeth going like a woodpecker. I nearly cried. I'm not ashamed to say it. Shivering means the body's fighting again. The dying ones go still and warm and grateful. The living ones shake and curse and shudder their way back. She was shaking her way back. "There you are," I whispered. "There you are." Her name was Cora. She told me on the second day, in a voice like a rusted hinge, when the fever came down enough for her to string words. She wouldn't tell me the rest for a while. Not the how, not the who. But I could read some of it the way you read a river by its surface. She flinched when I moved fast. She kept her back to the wall and her eyes on the door. When I set a bowl of broth in her hands, she looked at it a long moment like she was waiting for it to be taken back, and only ate when I turned away, as if hunger was a thing to be ashamed of. Somebody had trained her to expect nothing. You don't get that way from bad luck. You get that way from a person. I didn't push. I know what it is to have a room in you with the door nailed shut. I've got a few. Instead, I did the small things. I kept the fire fed. I mashed pine bark and made a poultice for that foot. She'd keep it, I decided, and I decided it's stubborn because I'd carried it down a mountain and I wasn't about to let it turn black now. I talked to her about nothing. The mule I'd lost, which I named posthumously Ungrateful. The way the light came pink off the peak some mornings. A crow that had adopted my woodpile and screamed at me for the crime of existing. Third morning, I caught her almost smiling at the crow's story. Fourth morning, she asked me a question, and it undid me a little. "Why?" she said, and had to stop and start again. "Why did you come back?" There it was, that word again, back. I sat down on the floor by the stove, careful, keeping my distance the way you would with a hurt animal that might bolt or bite. "Cora," I said, "I never left you nowhere. I found you. 2 days back in a drift on the North Ridge. First time I ever laid eyes on you was your hand reaching out of the snow." She went very still. "Whoever you thought I was," I said, as gentle as I had it in me, "he ain't me, and he ain't coming." I watched it land. I watched her do the math I'd done on the ridge, the cold arithmetic of what had actually happened to her, laid out plain, no more fever to blur it. Somebody had brought her up that mountain. Somebody had walked her out into a storm and left her in it and gone home. And for 2 days, half frozen and dreaming, some part of her had been waiting for that same somebody to have a change of heart and come find her. And instead a stranger had. Her face didn't crumple. I'd have understood if it had. It did something worse. It smoothed out, went flat and quiet and old. That's the face of a person who's been let down so many times that a fresh betrayal barely moves the needle. She just nodded once, like I'd confirmed a fact she'd already suspected about the shape of the world. "His name is Silas," she said to the fire, not to me. "My husband." And then, because I think she'd carried it alone so long that it had gone rotten inside her, she told me the rest. I'll give it to you the way she gave it to me, in pieces, out of order, with long silences where the worst parts were. She'd married Silas Vane at 19. Her people had land debts. He had money and a hard, handsome face and a way of making her feel chosen. For a while, she said, it was almost good. Then the mine he'd sunk his money into came up dry, and the man who'd chosen her decided she was one more bad investment. He drank. He got cruel in the specific, careful way that leaves marks a dress can cover. And when a claim opened up in a boomtown 2 ranges over, a fresh start, a place nobody knew him, he told her they were going together over the pass before the snows. Except there was a woman in the boomtown already, younger, no debts, nothing about her that reminded Silas of the years he'd wasted being poor. He didn't want to leave a widow behind him in a town where people knew us, Cora said. Her voice was flat as slate. A widow gets questions, a wife who wandered off in a storm and got lost that gets sympathy. He planned it. He waited for weather. He walked me up past the tree line and he told me to rest a minute, and I sat down in the snow and she stopped. Her jaw worked. He said he'd only be a moment, fetching a landmark. He'd be right back. The crows screamed outside. Inside, the fire popped. "I sat there," she said, "and I waited so long. And the strange thing, the thing I can't," her hand pressed flat against her own chest like she could hold something in. Even after I knew he wasn't coming, some part of me kept listening for his boots, kept getting ready to forgive him if he came back. Isn't that a sound that wasn't a laugh? Isn't that the most foolish thing you ever heard? "No," I said. She looked at me. "It's the least foolish thing I ever heard," I said. "You loved somebody, you wanted to be loved back. There's no shame in that. The shame's all his, and I hope it rots him. I've never been much for saying the right thing. I said the wrong thing to my own family for 20 years until they stopped answering my letters. But that one I got right, because I meant it down to the ground, and she heard that I meant it." Something in her face cracked, the flat smoothness broke, and for 1 second before she got herself back under control, I saw the whole size of it, everything she'd been holding. The betrayal, and under it the grief, and under that, deepest of all, the terrible, bewildered question a person carries when someone who was supposed to love them decided they were disposable. What is wrong with me, that I could be thrown away so easily? I know that question. I've been asking my own version of it since I was 15. I didn't answer hers out loud. Some questions you answer by staying. I put another log on the fire and I stayed. Here's the part I've turned over the most. That night, after she finally slept real sleep, the first deep sleep since I'd found her, I sat up cleaning my rifle by the stove, and I thought about Silas Vane. I knew the pass he'd have taken. I knew it'd be days yet before it fully closed, and I knew a man like that. A man walking to a warm bed and a young wife with his old one freezing behind him, would be moving slow and easy, guilty and relieved and certain he'd gotten away clean. I could catch him. I'm good in that country, it wouldn't even be hard. I sat there with the rifle across my knees and I did the arithmetic. The old tally in my head, the one my father gave me, what it would cost, what it would settle. And God help me I wanted to. I wanted it the way you want water. Not for justice, even I'm not going to dress it up. I wanted it because somewhere out there was a man who'd looked at a person's whole beating heart and decided it was worth less than his own convenience. And I have hated that exact man my entire life in 100 different faces. And here at last was one I could reach. I got as far as my coat. I got as far as the door. Then I heard her behind me, still asleep, make a small frightened sound and say a word, and it wasn't Sela's. It was Elia's, my name, reaching for me even in a nightmare the way she'd reached out of the snow. I stood at that door a long time with my hand on the cold latch. If I went out that pass, I'd likely come back with blood on me, and I'd have left her alone in a cabin in the mountains, left her waiting, listening for boots exactly like he had. Not the same, I told myself. Not the same at all. But it would feel the same to her when she woke and I was gone. It would teach her one more time that the men who say not yet, I'll be right back, are the ones who don't come. I hung the rifle back on its pegs. I'm not telling you I made the right choice because I'm a good man. I made it because the wrong choice would have cost the one thing I'd found up there worth keeping, and my tally, for once in my miserable life, came out clear. Some debts you don't collect. You just decide to stop bleeding from them. I banked the fire and I sat down against the wall where she could see me if she woke, and I watched her breathe. 14 to the minute, then 16, climbing. She'd expected to die in those mountains. She'd made her peace and reached out one last time out of pure animal habit, not even believing anyone would take her hand. I took it, that's all I did. I'm not a hero and this isn't that kind of story. But when she woke the next morning and found me still there, when I watched her open her eyes and check, the way you check for something you're braced to have lost, and then see me by the stove and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Something started right then. I didn't have a name for it yet, neither did she. We had a whole winter to find one. Winter dug in like a thing with claws, and for 6 weeks the mountain forgot we existed. That's the mercy of deep snow, if you can call it mercy. The pass is closed. The world shrank down to one room, one fire, 2 people, and a crow with a grudge. No Selas could reach us. No town could ask questions. Nothing could get in. Which meant, of course, that nothing could get out either, including everything Cora had been carrying. She healed slow and then all at once, the way a river breaks up in spring, quiet for so long you forget it's water at all, and then one morning it's roaring. The foot came back. I'd been half certain I'd lose it to the black rot, and there were 3 nights I sat up with my knife honed and my stomach in my throat, ready to do the thing I prayed I wouldn't have to. But the poultices held. The gray went to red, went to a angry pink, went finally to skin. She'd limp on it the rest of her days, I figured, and she'd walk. Both were true. The first time she stood on her own, really stood. No wall, no hand, just her own 2 feet on my cabin floor. She looked down at herself like she'd caught the ground trying to steal something from her. "Well," she said. "Well," I agreed. Then she took a step and swayed, and I moved to catch her, and she put out one hand flat, stop, not sharp. "Just certain. Let me fall if I fall," she said. "I want to know if I can hold myself up." She didn't fall, but I understood, standing there with my empty hands, that she wasn't only talking about her feet. She'd spent years being held up by a man who used it as a leash. She needed to know the difference between someone catching her and someone owning her. I put my hands in my pockets and I let her cross that floor alone, and it was one of the hardest kind things I ever did, to stand back and let somebody do the frightening thing themselves. She made it to the far wall, turned around, and there was a look on her face I hadn't seen once in all the days of fever and grief and flat quiet. She looked pleased with herself. Small thing. You'd have missed it, but I'd been watching her face like weather for weeks, and I knew every version of it, and this one was new. This one had a person behind it, coming back online, lighting up rooms in herself that had been dark a long time. We fell into the rhythm of two people surviving a winter, which is its own kind of intimacy, not the kind the songs are about, the plainer kind. Who feeds the fire? Who mends what? The choreography of a small space. She was, it turned out, sharp as a tack and twice as pointed. The fever had hidden it. As her strength came up, so did her tongue, and she could cut. "You count things," she said one evening out of nowhere. "I've been tallying the firewood under my breath, a habit I didn't know showed. You do it constantly, rows, days. I've watched you count the same 3 shelves 4 times in an hour." I felt my ears go hot. "Keeps me honest." "Keeps you scared," she said. Not cruel, just true, the way she was learning to be true again now that lying to survive wasn't the daily work anymore. "You count because if you know exactly what you have, no one can take it without you noticing. I know that arithmetic. I did it with bruises." She tilted her head. "How many times, Elias?" "How many times what?" "How many times have you been left? That's the number you never say out loud. I can hear you not saying it." I didn't answer. I've been asked hard questions by hard people and dodged them all my life. But she wasn't asking to wound me. She was asking because she'd found the same door nailed shut in me that was nailed shut in her, and she wanted me to know she saw it, so that mine would keep hers company. 15, I said finally. My voice came out strange. First one was my mother. I was 15. She didn't die, she just chose different. Chose a man who didn't want a boy hanging around. After that I sort of expected it from everybody. Got so I'd leave first. Easier to be the one walking away. I looked at my hands. 20 years of walking away first. That's how a man ends up alone at 9,000 feet talking to a crow. The fire popped. 15, she repeated softly. Not 15 times, 15 years old. She'd understood which number I meant. You were a child. Everybody was a child once. Don't make it special. No, she said, but you carried it like it was your fault. I know that too. She was quiet a moment. Sila's made me believe I earned it every time, that if I'd been better, quieter, prettier, less, he wouldn't have had to. I sat in that snow and part of me thought, this is what I get for being difficult, for being too much. Her jaw set. I'm only now starting to think it wasn't a bill I owed. It was just cruelty. His cruelty. It didn't have anything to do with what I was worth. She looked at me across the fire, and there was steel coming up in her that hadn't been there a month before. Steel I'd watched her forge night by night out of nothing but stubbornness and broth. You should try thinking that too, she said. About your mother, about the whole tally. A pause. It wasn't a bill, you didn't owe it. I've heard preachers talk for an hour and move me less than she moved me with that. I couldn't say anything. I got up and made a great show of tending a fire that didn't need tending, and I felt something shift in my chest that had been stuck so long I'd stopped thinking of it as stuck. Just thought of it as the shape I was. It wasn't a bill. I turned it over all night. First new thought I'd had in 20 years. Here's a thing about two wounded people in a small room. They can heal each other, and they can also flinch each other raw, and it's the same closeness that does both. We fought some. Nothing violent, God, no. She'd have gone through the wall and I'd never have raised a hand. We'd both had enough of hands. We fought the way scared people fight. Sideways. About firewood when it wasn't about firewood. One night it got bad. I don't even fully remember how it started, something small. She'd moved my things or I'd hovered too close when she was doing for herself and she felt the leash of it. And it spiraled the way these things do. Both of us saying the sharp, easy thing instead of the true hard thing, and she ended up with her back to the wall, chest heaving, eyes bright and furious, and I realized with a lurch of horror that she'd put herself in the corner. Braced. Old habit. Getting ready for a blow that in her whole life with me had never once come and never would. I stopped talking mid-word. I sat down, on the floor, made myself small and low and harmless, put my back against the opposite wall as far from her as the room allowed. I'm not him, I said quietly. I'm never going to be him. You can be as angry as you want, and I'm going to sit right here on this floor until you're done, and then I'm going to make you tea because I'm sorry and I was wrong about the hell. I don't even remember what I was wrong about. I was wrong. Be angry. It's safe to be angry here. I promise you it's safe. She stared at me. The fury drained slow, and behind it was something raw, the disbelief of a person discovering that anger doesn't have to be dangerous, that you can raise your voice in a room and the room doesn't turn on you. She slid down the wall until she was sitting too. We sat on the floor of my cabin, the length of the room between us, both breathing hard, and then she laughed, that broken laugh from the drift, but fuller now, with more person in it. You are the strangest man, she said. I've been told. Make the tea. I made the tea. The snow began to soften in the third week of what I reckoned was February. I didn't tell her right away. That's a confession. I felt the change in the air before she did, the drip from the eaves, the particular smell of a thaw starting, days off yet but coming, and I sat on the knowledge like a man sitting on a splinter because I knew what the thaw meant. The thaw meant the passes would open. The thaw meant the world could reach us again. And the world, for Cora, had a name and a hard, handsome face, and a young wife 2 ranges over, and it had left her for dead once already. I told myself Sila's vein was gone, halfway to his boomtown, building his new lie, never to be thought of again. A man who'd murdered his wife by weather doesn't come back to check the body. Why would he? Except I'd been doing my own arithmetic in the long nights, and it kept coming out wrong, and it wouldn't leave me alone. Because here's the thing, a careful, cruel man like Silas would eventually think, once the relief wore off and the caution came back, what if she didn't die? Storms are chancy. Bodies get found. A wife who wandered off gets sympathy, but a wife who wandered off and then turned up alive, half froze with a story. That's the gallows. That's everything he'd built collapsing. A man who planned a murder around plausible weather is a man who thinks ahead, and a man who thinks ahead, come the thaw, might just come back over that pass to make certain the mountain had finished the job he'd started. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself I was seeing threats in the smoke again, the way I saw my mother's face. 15 betrayals will do that, make you expect the worst so hard you conjure it. Then 4 days into the thaw, the crow stopped screaming. You live alone long enough, you learn your alarms. That crow screamed at everything, at me, at the wind, at the offense of the sun coming up. When a crow goes quiet, something's moved into its country that it's decided not to argue with, something bigger than me. I went out at first light and I read the snow at the tree line, and my stomach dropped into my boots. Boot prints coming up the pass, a day old maybe less, one set, a man's long stride moving careful. Coming this way. I stood in the melting snow a long time, and I did the hardest arithmetic of my life. I could not tell her. I could take the rifle and go down and meet him on the trail and end it, and she'd never have to know the world had come for her again. Keep her in the warm room where nothing could reach. Keep her safe by keeping her ignorant. That's what he would have done. Decided for her, managed her, handled her like a problem to be solved rather than a person with a right to her own war. I went back inside. She was up, banking the fire, moving good now, the limp folded into her walk like it had always been there. She saw my face and went still. What? She said. I've dodged every hard question my whole life. I didn't dodge this one. Somebody's coming up the pass, I said. One man, on foot, careful, a day out, maybe less. I made myself say the rest plain, no cushioning. I think it's Sila's. I think he's coming back to make sure. The color went out of her face. For one terrible second I watched her fold back into the woman from the drift, the flat, the small, the braced. Watched years of this is what I get rushed back up to drown the steel she'd built. I braced myself to catch her. She caught herself. I saw it happen. I saw her hand go flat against her own chest, that gesture, holding something in, and then I saw her decide, right there on my cabin floor, that she was done being something that happened to her. Done sitting in snow, waiting, listening for boots, getting ready to forgive. The flatness cracked, and what came up through it this time wasn't grief. It was fury, clean and cold and entirely her own. "No," she said, "not to me, to the door and the pass and the man walking up it. No, he doesn't get to come back and finish it. He doesn't get to check his work." She turned to me, and her eyes were bright and dry and absolutely level. "I'm not going to hide in here while you deal with him for me. I've had a man decide my life for me behind my back. I won't have another one do it, even a kind one. Even you." It landed like a slap, and I deserved it, and I loved her for it. Which is the exact moment I understood that I did love her, and what a stupid time to find that out. "All right," I said when I could talk. "Then we decide together. What do you want to do?" She looked at the rifle on its pegs. She looked at the door. And then she said something I didn't expect, something that told me she'd come further back to herself than even I'd guessed, because it wasn't the easy fury, the pull-the-trigger fury. It was harder than that, colder and cleaner. "I don't want him dead," she said slowly. "I thought I did, part of me still does. But if you kill him on that trail, then I spend the rest of my life as a woman two men decided things about in the snow, him and you. I don't want to be saved from him, Elias. I want to face him. I want him to see me alive and know I know, and understand that the mountain didn't take me and neither will he. I want to be the thing he can't explain away." The fire cracked. Outside, somewhere down the pass, a man was climbing toward us with murder folded up neat in his coat, not knowing that the woman he'd thrown away had spent a winter learning how to stand. "Okay," I said, "then we're gonna need a plan, and you're gonna need to be able to hold that rifle steady even if you never mean to fire it. Can you?" She limped to the pegs and took it down, checked it the way I'd shown her without ever quite meaning to teach her, set the stock against her shoulder, sighted down the barrel at the door, and held it there, steady, no tremor, the winter's stubbornness gone straight down her arms. "Show me the rest," she said. He came at dusk, which was exactly like him, a man who does his worst work in bad light. We'd had a day to get ready and we'd used it, not the way you'd think. I'd wanted traps, positions, angles of fire, all the careful murder a mountain man knows. Cora had let me set exactly one thing, a place for me, out of sight, with the rifle, in case, she said, not for. The rest of the day she'd spent on herself. She washed. She put on the one decent dress that had dried stiff by the stove all these weeks, the traveling dress she'd near died in, and I understood without asking why she chose that one. She wanted him to see it. She wanted him to know she'd worn the thing he'd left her to freeze in and lived. She combed her hair out and pinned it up with hands that didn't shake, and she practiced sitting, of all things in the one chair, facing the door, still and straight, hands folded, like a woman receiving a guest she'd been expecting. "You're going to sit there," I said. "You're just going to sit there and let him walk in." "I'm going to sit here," she agreed, "and let him walk in and let him see me sitting and watch it take everything out of him. He built a whole new life on me being gone, Elias, on me being a thing he could leave behind. Let him open that door and find the thing still here." Her mouth was calm, her eyes were not. "I don't need to point a gun at him. I am the gun." So when the boot prints reached the clearing at dusk and stopped, and a man's voice called out, friendly, careful testing, "Hello, the cabin. Traveler needs shelter." Cora did not move from her chair. I was where she'd put me, behind the wood partition in the dark, rifle across my knees, close enough to see her, close enough to end it if it went the way I feared. My every instinct screamed to be between her and that door. She'd forbidden it. "Let me hold myself up," she'd said, weeks ago, crossing a floor alone. This was that same sentence, grown all the way up. The latch lifted, the door swung. Sela's vein filled it, and I'll admit it, He was handsome the way a good knife is handsome, all clean lines and no warmth. He had a face made for being trusted. He was already talking as he came in, some traveler's easy patter, shaking snow off his coat, not yet looking up. And then he looked up. I have watched a lot of things die. I never watched a man die on his feet with his heart still beating, until I watched Silas Vane see his wife sitting in that chair. Everything left his face. The charm, the color, the careful built future, all of it drained out through his boots into my floor. He made a sound, not a word, a sound like a man who stepped off a stair that isn't there. "Cora," he said, barely. "Hello, Silas." Her voice was terrible in its calm. "You look like you've seen a ghost, a beat. Sit down, you've had a long walk. I know how long. I made it too, though you had both boots." He didn't sit. His eyes were doing what mine had done on the ridge, the frantic arithmetic. How is she here? Who else is here? What does she know? How do I get out from under this? I watched him decide, watched the fear curdle into something uglier and more familiar. He'd come up that pass for a reason. Finding her alive didn't cancel the reason. It sharpened it. "You're alive," he said, and tried to make it sound like joy and got nowhere near. "Cora, God, I searched the storm. I lost you. I've been out of my mind." "Don't," she said it soft and it cut him off cleaner than a shout. "Don't do the searching for me. I sat in the snow and listened for your boots for 2 days, Silas. I would have known the sound of you coming back. There wasn't any sound. You didn't lose me. You set me down like a bag you were tired of carrying and you walked to your new life and you didn't look back once." Her hands stayed folded. "I know about her, the girl in the boomtown. I've had a whole winter to know things." His jaw worked. The mask was coming off in pieces now. "So the only question I have," Cora went on, and here at last her voice found its edge, "is why you came back. You'd gotten away. I was supposed to be under the snow. Why climb all the way up here?" She tilted her head and answered it herself because she already knew. She'd known before he ever reached the tree line. "Because you couldn't be sure. And a man like you can't build anything on a maybe. You came up this mountain to make certain the job was done." The silence in that cabin was the loudest thing I've ever not heard. And Silas Vane, cornered, seeing his lie stand up alive and unafraid and knowing, did the thing cornered cruel men do. His hand went to his coat. I had him. Understand that. My rifle was up and my finger was on the trigger before his hand cleared the wool, and at that range I do not miss. 1 ounce more of pressure and Cora would never be troubled by Silas Vane again, and no court in that country would have called it anything but a stranger defending a home. I looked at her to see it, the go-ahead, the nod, the do-it. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at him. And she said one word, and it wasn't to me, and it wasn't a scream. "Don't," she said to Silas. "Don't make him do it. Because if he pulls that trigger, then you got to decide how my story ends after all. You made me a thing men shot over in the snow, right to the last, and I won't have it." She stood up. On her ruined foot, straight-backed, unarmed, she stood up out of that chair and faced the man who'd killed her or thought he had. "Take your hand out of your coat. Empty. Turn around. Walk back down the pass. And live the rest of your small life knowing you failed, that you couldn't even do this right, that the mountain gave me back and I let you go. And every day you spend with that girl, you'll wonder if today's the day it comes out. That's what you get, Silas. Not a bullet, that. You get to be haunted." I have never in my life seen anything braver, and I have seen men do brave things in front of grizzlies. For a long, long moment nobody moved. His hand in his coat, my rifle on his heart. Her in the middle between the two men and their weapons, holding the whole room up with nothing but a straight back and a winter's worth of hard-won spine. And then, I still don't fully know why, and I've turned it over 1,000 times, his hand came out of his coat. Empty. Whether it was cowardice or the ghost of something better, or just the plain animal knowledge that the man in the dark would kill him before his own pistol cleared, his hand came out empty. He looked at her one more time. Whatever he'd married, whatever he'd thrown away, I think he finally saw it clear right then. At the exact moment it was gone from him forever. Something crossed his face that might, in a better man, have become shame. Then he turned and he walked out my door and down into the dark of the pass and out of her life. She stood facing the open door until the sound of his boots got small and then was gone. Same sound she'd waited 2 days to hear once. Now she was listening to it leave and choosing that, and I understood that this, not survival, not the rescue, not even the winter, this was the thing that healed her. Not being saved from him, watching him go on her word by her choice. Only when the silence was complete did her knees finally go. I got the rifle down and got to her before she hit the floor, and she let me this once, because holding yourself up and never once being caught are two different prisons, and she'd learned the difference. She shook against me, not from cold, the shaking your way back kind, the alive kind, and I held her and I didn't count anything. First time in 20 years I held something and didn't tally what it might cost me to lose it. "He's gone," I said into her hair. "I know," she said. "I let him go." A ragged breath. "God, Elias, I let him go. And I thought I'd feel cheated. I don't. I feel," she couldn't find it. "Neither could I. There isn't a good word for the feeling of setting down a thing you've carried so long it grew into your hands." Lighter maybe, we felt lighter. The thaw came on in earnest after that, and the mountain gave the world back to us slow. "I'll tell you plain because you've stayed with this whole thing and you've earned plain. I don't know how it all ends. This isn't the kind of story that ends. Real ones don't." She stayed through the spring. Some of that was the foot. She wasn't fit to travel far, and I told myself that was the reason. And it was a lie we were both kind enough to let stand for a while. When the passes were good and open and she could have gone anywhere, gone to a town, gone to build the life Silas had tried to bury with her, she didn't go. But she didn't stay the old way either, not clinging, not waiting, not a woman held up by a man's permission. She'd come too far back to herself for that. She stayed the way a person stays who's chosen it with both eyes open, who could leave, who knows she could leave, and every single morning picks this instead. That's the only kind of staying worth a damn. I know because I'd never had it before from anyone and I'd stopped believing it existed. We were careful with each other. Two people that broken don't get to be careless. Some nights the old ghosts came for her and she'd wake braced in the corner, and I'd sit on the floor across the room, small and harmless, until she remembered where she was and who I wasn't. Some nights my own tally crept up on me, the 15 betrayals, the certainty that everyone leaves and it's easier to leave first, and she'd catch me at the door of myself with my hand on the latch and she'd say, "Quiet. It wasn't a bill, Elias. You didn't owe it, come back to the fire," and I would. We taught each other, slow, over a whole spring, a thing neither of us had ever been taught, that when someone says "I'll be right back," they can mean it. That boots going away can also mean boots coming home. That not everyone who has your whole heart in their hands decides it's worth less than their own convenience. The crow came back and screamed at both of us now, impartial, which I chose to take as acceptance. I still count things. Some habits are load-bearing, take them out all at once and the roof comes down. But I count different now. I don't count what I might lose. I count what I have. Firewood and daylight and the number of mornings she's chosen to stay, which I've stopped keeping track of because it stopped feeling like something that could be taken. The last morning I want to tell you about, I woke before her, and the light was coming pink off the peaks the way it does, and she was still asleep, breathing slow and easy, 16 to the minute, then 18, climbing, always climbing now. And I lay there and I thought about a hand reaching up out of a snowdrift on the worst day of a bad winter, reaching for a man who never came, and finding instead one who did. She stirred, half woke, reached out in her sleep the way she still does, that old animal habit, checking the world hasn't left her in the night. Her hand found my collar, and I put my own hand over it, and I held on and I